Chairwoman Lauren Underwood. Representative Underwood joined Congress in 2019. There she is. Hello. She, at that point, she was the youngest African-American woman ever elected to Congress. Since that time has proven herself as a real leader on a wide range of issues, including healthcare and education and cybersecurity. And she is the new chairwoman of the House Homeland Security Committee's Cybersecurity Subcommittee. And so we I think it's been about a month now that she's been the chairwoman, and we really look forward to having her join and engage on these a wide range of issues, and really feel honored that this is one of the first places that she's spoken directly about cybersecurity. So we get the first view of her agenda for the coming year. And I also like to congratulate you, Congresswoman, on your victory, because I know that it was a tough race, and I know that you fought really hard for that. And we're happy to have you coming forward and being the chairwoman for the future. Thank you very much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in today's important discussion about cybersecurity policies for the 117th Congress and how we can work together to better secure and defend the internet ecosystem. When I came to Congress in 2019, I made defending our elections from foreign interference one of my top priorities. As we all know, a huge component of that is cybersecurity. In 2016, Russian hackers infiltrated the voter registration database of my state of Illinois, capturing personal data of 76,000 voters. Over the course of the 116th Congress, I've hosted a field hearing in Gurnee, Illinois, to assess the federal government's coordination with its state and local partners to defend election infrastructure, held an online forum to understand the tactics of foreign influence campaigns, and worked with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to make sure it was doing its part to secure the 2020 elections. Last week, CISA issued a statement describing the November elections as the most secure in our nation's history, emphasizing that there was, quote, no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised, end quote. My colleagues and I in the House have fought to send more federal support to state and local election officials. This support is urgently needed to replace outdated, insecure voting equipment, to improve the security of voter registration databases and e-poll books, and to implement risk-limiting audits, among other things. But our efforts this summer were blocked in the Senate. The 2020 election may be over, but the need for resources remains. I'm committed to working with my colleagues in the next Congress to make sure that our elections are even more secure in 2022 and 2024. Strong leadership at CISA and a clear mandate from the White House to secure elections will be a critical component to that effort. I'm confident that the Biden administration will prioritize election security. That said, I am disturbed by articles this past week reporting rumors that the current administration might punish CISA leadership for their good work on election security. Continuity of leadership and a smooth transition at CISA are critical to ensuring confidence in the 2020 election results and the success of other cybersecurity priorities moving forward. In addition to addressing ongoing election security issues, there are 3 other top cybersecurity priorities I look forward to addressing in the 117th Congress. One is identifying systemic approaches to improving the security of the internet ecosystem. 2, improving how we prevent and respond to ransomware attacks. And 3, increasing CISA's ability to scale up support for targeted entities while maintaining planned operations. As some of you know, my background's in public health. When we tackle public health challenges, we know it's neither fair nor effective to put the whole burden on individuals to solve a systemic problem. Instead, we have to identify systemic approaches that address problems on a broader scale for maximum impact. Now, there's a famous story in our public health field about the origin of epidemiology. It takes place in 1854 during a major cholera outbreak in London. A doctor named John Snow had figured out that cholera was caused by contaminated water, and he had traced a cluster of deaths during the 1854 outbreak to a single water pump located on Broad Street. Instead of going around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, trying to individually persuade each resident not to drink from that pump, Dr. Snow went to the local authorities and persuaded them to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump so that no more contaminated water could be drawn from it. The story of the Broad Street pump exemplifies the way we approach many public health challenges to this day. As chairwoman of the Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation Subcommittee, I'm interested in finding where the pump handles are, so to speak. We are dealing with a suite of systemic weaknesses in the field of cybersecurity. Solving those weaknesses means lawmakers like me need to work closely with the experts in this room. I know there are ways that we can work together to take a Broad Street pump approach to the cybersecurity challenges facing our nation. To that end, I think the Cyberspace Solarium Commission makes a number of important recommendations that are worthy of further discussion and analysis, and I look forward to hearing the thoughts and suggestions of the people participating today. I've also focused on addressing the ongoing challenges posed by the increase in ransomware attacks. It is not realistic to tell state and local governments, hospitals, or small businesses to simply not pay a ransom demand. Instead, we must empower potential ransomware victims with options and weaken their attackers. That means helping state and local governments and critical infrastructure owners and operators improve their cybersecurity posture, build resiliency into their operations, and provide resources to help victims rebuild affected networks. I believe CISA can take on many of those challenges if Congress provides the right authorities and resources. Finally, I hope to put CISA in a position to dynamically respond to emerging threats without interrupting its day-to-day operations. In 2017, state and local officials flooded CISA with requests for risk and vulnerability assessments, RVAs, creating a 9-month-long waiting list. Under pressure from Congress, the waiting list for the RVAs seemed to disappear. We later learned that CISA had postponed RVAs for federal networks to meet the needs of state and local election officials. Similarly, CISA delayed deployment of continuous diagnostic and mitigation tools to certain federal networks in order to expedite deployment to the Department of Health and Human Services as COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. Although I understand CISA's challenges in working within the limits of its budget, I'm concerned that constantly being forced to shift resources to address the latest threat creates an unsustainable game of whack-a-mole that leaves our networks vulnerable. We must identify an approach that provides CISA with the flexibility to scale up resources to address emerging threats while continuing its day-to-day operations. I'm excited to work with all of you on these and other cybersecurity challenges facing our nation. With that, looking forward to today's conversation, and thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great overview of the things you're looking to do. Let me just tell people that they can use the Q&A button on the bottom to ask questions. So people should feel free to do that. And then I'll take the prerogative of asking a first question here, which is, I want to follow up on your comments on ransomware, because I know that it's a huge growing issue, obviously, for local government, state government, for hospitals, for schools, especially at this time when people are working remotely, et cetera. So, but one thing you talked about empowering them to act in this space and getting money, resources for them. How do you see us going about doing that, and what will you do to help have the committee move in that direction?
Yep, what a timely question. So over the past 2 years, we've seen ransomware attacks against some of our largest cities, right? Like Baltimore and Atlanta. And we've seen them cripple government services and cost taxpayers millions of dollars. Obviously, if even big cities are being victimized, smaller municipalities with fewer resources are especially vulnerable. My constituents in the Illinois 14th District know this too well, since one of our school districts was even hit by a ransomware attack last year. As I mentioned, we have to do more than simply tell people not to pay the ransom. We have to provide education, we have to provide resources, and give folks options. First, we have to communicate to our state and local partners about the potential problems associated with paying off a ransom demand, that they might not get their data back, that their data could still be sold or shared, the hacker could still be in the network, and the hacker may be subject to sanctions. Second, we have to help state and local partners better secure their networks. So this past fall, the House passed HR 5823, which is the State and Local Government Cybersecurity Act, which would establish a $400 million grant program at DHS to help state and local governments improve their cybersecurity posture. Senate action on that bill would be a huge step forward in our ability to fight against ransomware. And finally, we have to consider providing resources to build those who have been impacted by ransomware attacks to help them rebuild their networks more securely. And so I think it's best to prevent ransomware attacks by helping these state and local governments build better defenses. Even the best defenses can be overcome, right? And so we need to be better prepared for that instead of just leaving victims to fend for themselves.
Thank you. We have a question from Kent Lanfield from McAfee, who asked about the politicization of the CISA and what we can do to on the director job. I know that you have in the NDAA, the House passed language related to that. Are you supportive of that language, and how do we move that forward to depoliticize this CISA directorship?
Yep. So there's no room for politics in CISA's mission of defending our most critical networks. And in the last worldwide threat assessment, it warned that our adversaries were going to use cyber capabilities to undermine the United States and advance their own agendas. We know that these adversaries have used cyber tools to steal intellectual property and personal data, to engage in espionage, and execute destructive and expensive attacks. So to that end, I was really disturbed by rumors last week that Director Krebs might be forced out because of CISA's election security work. CISA's leadership should be commended for their quick work building a strong election security partnerships. And as far as the NDAA language, the National Defense Authorization Act, establishing a 5-year term for the CISA director, it's my understanding that there were objections in the Senate. And so we're going to reassess that legislation in the next Congress.
Thanks. The next question is from Christian Judge, who asks, many countries have a national call center paid for by the government for individuals and small businesses to call when impacted by cyber threats. Do you see that happening in the U.S. at any point?
You know, Christian, I think that's an interesting question. I think that at least in terms of the scope of our work, we know that CISA operates a series of these ISACs, like the industry-specific councils that have pretty broad scope and would encourage folks that are connected with organizations in this broadly defined critical infrastructure space to get connected with one of those groups. I would say the other option for folks, if on the criminality side, is to make sure that if they are a victim of an attack, to be in touch with the FBI. And I know that in maybe a lay audience, it might seem like kind of ridiculous to say that, but you all are a very discerning group and you know exactly what I mean. So I would not hesitate to reach out if you find yourself on the receiving end of an attack.
Thanks. Here's a semi-anonymous question asking about the ability to hack voting machines, and whether the proprietary nature of a lot of the voting machines and the way that the voting machine companies have responded to that. There's a question about whether we can make more of the move more voting machines to open source so that they can be audited by researchers and tested and made more secure. I don't know if you've looked into that or not, or if you have thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. So, we do know that there is a lot of room for improvement with the actual voting machines. We know that some states are still using outdated election equipment that can't be patched. And we know that risk limiting audits haven't been universally adopted, and disinformation campaigns continue to obviously undermine confidence in elections. And so, I have been a real champion of increased funding, ongoing funding, predictable funding for state and local officials, the election officials, so that they can replace this outdated technology, train staff, and implement these risk limiting audits. It's so important. And I think that, quite frankly, what happened in this Congress with our repeated efforts over and over and over to pass legislation to secure our elections, including these types of hardware improvements, giving states and local officials money to do this work, and to have, Mitch McConnell either deny or only, be willing to appropriate 10% of the dollars that the House passed is just unacceptable. And so, we've got to be at a place where election security is not received or viewed in a partisan lens. Our state and local officials are trying to stretch every dollar, and they can't do it. And so while, yes, there's a lot of opportunity in the technology space in order to improve the hardware, if those devices can't get into the communities, right, because the state and local election officials cannot afford to purchase them, then we are not going to be in good shape as a country. And so right now, I think we have a real kind of political problem that we all need to continue to work through in order to make sure that these resources are getting into the communities we serve.
So I have two questions on ransomware that are semi-related. So one is from Carl Landwehr, one's from Richard Harrison, and they ask, what your plans are for addressing it more broadly. We talked a little bit about state and local governments and getting funds to them, but more broadly on stopping ransomware. And then specifically, Carl asked about product liability and whether the product liability for products that have been attacked, that have vulnerabilities that have been attacked, if you've looked into that issue at all.
Yep, not looked into the liability piece. If you all have specific thoughts, I would encourage you to reach out to our subcommittee, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Innovation Subcommittee, the Committee on Homeland Security. Would love your input there. I'm not, to be candid with you, sure that we have jurisdiction over that liability piece, because CISA wouldn't have jurisdiction over that liability piece. But happy to receive your feedback and to work with my colleagues. In terms of broader ransomware threats, obviously I'm very concerned with what's going on in the healthcare sector. Even in the last several weeks, we've seen a dramatic uptake in the number of attacks on our healthcare sector because the healthcare providers are these tempting targets for hospital administrators. They're trying to decide whether to pay a ransom, and the stakes for that hospital system administration could be life or death for a patient. And so, we have to be proactive in addressing these vulnerabilities. It's about prevention. And so CISA, in my opinion, has a really important but underutilized role to play because we have to make sure that healthcare providers, especially those smaller providers with fewer resources, even know about CISA's free resources like cybersecurity assessments and penetration testing. And then we need these healthcare organizations to enroll in the coordinating bodies like the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council and the Health ISAC. And if for some reason we have some healthcare folks on this call, please contact your local protective security advisor, the PSAs. They are in your region to serve you, to see what CISA has to offer, and to join that health ISAC if possible, to get plugged in with the federal resources and partnerships that can help you stay prepared. And then there's these interagency processes and coordination between CISA, the FBI, Health and Human Services, and sector coordinating bodies. And that, interagency relationship mirrors for the other critical infrastructure sectors. So I'm just talking about healthcare as an example here. When we have more positive interagency coordination, we've seen how much more seamlessly information can flow and how helpful it is for end users, right? Like the partners in the community. And so I'm hoping that kind of broad interagency partnership will improve under the Biden administration.
Yeah, that's great. That'd be great. A big shout out to the Health ISAC, to Denise Anderson, who runs it. She's spoken at this conference before, and they do great work. So it is good to call them out. One final question. This is from a reporter from your inbox who asked, about, you had mentioned about systemic approaches. She wants to know what you think the private sector's role in building in building a systemic approach to protecting cybersecurity is.
Well, private sector are key partners here. I mean, we at every turn are engaging. And even if you monitor what the way that the committee functions, we're engaging our private sector partners. We're getting information, learning about new vulnerabilities, and quite frankly, we're eager to hear from folks, even on this call, about what your ideas and priorities are moving forward, because you guys are the experts on these issues. And so when we think about the agenda moving forward, we need to hear from you. And so again, I want to encourage everyone who has feedback about these issues that I raised or some others, right? Because we know that this is a landscape that is changing very rapidly, to please reach out to our subcommittee. We have amazing staff. I'm excited for the work that we can do together, and our door is always open. So, I talked about this interagency coordination. We talked about state and local governments. We talked about, the role of the Congress and, the work we need to do with the Senate. But I don't want you to hear that we don't think that there's a role for private industry. Oh my goodness, we're counting on you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate your time. I think you've shown us why you've been named the chair of this committee, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Take good care of yourselves, everybody, okay? Bye.
Thanks.